Secret agent vanishes. Years later, his last belonging is found and shocks the nation. Jennifer Anderson felt her legs tremble as she held the phone. The news she had just received would change everything she believed about her father for the past 30 years. It all began when construction worker Mike Johnson knocked on her door in Portland on that rainy Tuesday morning. In his hands, he carried an old, dusty briefcase covered in green moss that seemed to have grown for decades. "Mrs. Anderson, you need to see this. We found it during the renovation of the late Richard's house over on Maple Street," Mike said, handing her the heavy briefcase. Jennifer eyed the object suspiciously. The house he mentioned had been abandoned for over 20 years, ever since the previous owner passed away. Now the heirs had decided to renovate and sell it. "Why are you bringing this to me?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Because there are documents inside with the name William Thompson. I remember you always said that was your father's name, the one who disappeared, right?" Jennifer's heart raced. William Thompson. It had been 30 years since she'd heard that name without feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Her father had abandoned her and her mother when Jennifer was just 12, leaving with another woman without explanation. "Open it right here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mike forced the rusted locks of the briefcase open. The sound of metal giving way echoed through the small living room. When the lid lifted, Jennifer saw stacks of yellowed papers, photographs, and something that made her throat tighten. Her original birth certificate and her parents' marriage certificate. "My God," she murmured, picking up a photo of herself as a child, smiling in the arms of a mustached man. Among the documents was a sealed letter with her name handwritten on it. With trembling fingers, Jennifer opened the envelope. The first few lines made her sink into the nearest chair. "My dear Jennifer, if you're reading this, it means the time has come for you to learn the truth about why your father had to leave. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Jennifer read the entire letter twice before she could process what was written. Her father hadn't run off with another woman. He had worked as a specialized translator for government agencies, handling confidential documents from foreign countries. During one of these translations, he had uncovered serious financial misconduct involving misappropriated funds meant for social programs. The letter explained that William had tried to report the scheme internally, but soon realized powerful people were involved. Threats began, first by phone, then notes left on his desk. The final straw was when they found crushed glass in the food of Nancy, his wife. "I had to choose between fighting people who could hurt you or disappearing to protect you. I chose exile, my daughter. I chose to live far away so you could live in peace." Mike was still in the room, watching Jennifer cry over the papers. He stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "There's more in the briefcase, Mrs. Anderson. Look here." Inside was a map of the hot springs area, with several points marked in red. Next to the map was a small golden key attached to a leather keychain with the initials WT. "This key looks like it's for a safe," Mike observed. "My mother needs to know about this," Jennifer said, drying her eyes. "She's at Sunshine Retirement Home. All these years she believed she was abandoned." The retirement home was a 15-minute drive from Jennifer's house. The whole way there, she rehearsed how she would break the news to Nancy about the discovery. Your mother, now 75 years old, had remarried 5 years after William's disappearance. Her second husband, Charles Miller, had always been a controlling man who constantly repeated that William had left because he was weak and irresponsible. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important," said Jennifer, entering the simple room where Nancy was resting. "About what, dear?" asked Nancy, adjusting her glasses. "About Dad. About William." Nancy's face immediately closed off. It was always like this whenever the subject came up. Decades of resentment don't fade easily. "Jennifer, you know I don't like talking about this. That man abandoned us and that's that." "No, Mom, he didn't abandon us. Look at this." Jennifer showed her the letter and the documents found in the briefcase. As Nancy read them, her hands began to tremble. Tears streamed down the wrinkled face of the woman who had spent decades believing a lie. This can't be true, Nancy whispered. Charles always said that. Charles doesn't know anything, Mum. Dad left to protect us. Look here, there are more letters. Among the papers, Jennifer had found a series of unsent letters, all addressed to Nancy. In one of them, dated just a month after his disappearance, William wrote about a job he'd gotten in a small town and how he sent money anonymously through different people. Remember those times when money would appear at our door? Jennifer asked. You always thought it was charity from neighbors. Nancy covered her mouth with her hand. It had indeed happened several times during the first 2 years after his disappearance. Envelopes with money would appear under the door without notes or explanations. My God, it was him all along, she murmured. The nurse Susan, who had known Nancy for years, approached the bed. Mrs. Nancy, are you all right? You seem upset. Susan, remember when I talked about my first husband? We found his letters. He didn't abandon us like we thought. Susan sat on the edge of the bed. She was a simple woman in her 50s who always listened to her patients' stories with patience. And now, Mrs. Nancy, what will you do with this information? I don't know. I spent so many years hating him, believing he'd left me for someone else. Jennifer held her mother's hand. Mum, there's a map here and a key. I think we should investigate. Dad might have left more clues about where he's been all these years. Nancy looked at her daughter with a mix of hope and fear. What if we find things that will hurt us even more, Jennifer? Or what if we find out he loved us until his last day? We can't spend the rest of our lives not knowing the full truth. That same afternoon, Jennifer decided to follow the markings on the map. The first stop was an inn in the town of Warm Springs, about a 2-hour drive from Portland. Nancy insisted on coming along, despite her age and frailty. Grace Haven Inn was a simple 2-story building with a faded yellow facade. The owner, Mr. Oscar, was a white-haired man who had inherited the business from his father. William Thompson? He repeated when Jennifer showed him a photo of her father. Of course I remember him. Bill, as he liked to be called. Stayed here for almost 2 years between 1994 and 1996. Jennifer's heart raced. Finally, someone who had known her father during those lost years. Did he talk about family? Nancy asked, her voice choked. Every day, ma'am. He spent his nights writing letters and looking at photographs. Always said he had a beautiful daughter and a wife who was the love of his life. But he seemed so sad, like he was carrying some kind of burden. Mr. Oscar led them to the room where William had stayed. It was small but clean, with a window overlooking a backyard garden. He left some things when he went away, said someone would come for them one day. I kept everything in storage, waiting. In the dusty storage room, Mr. Oscar brought out a cardboard box with William's belongings. Inside were simple clothes, an old radio, and a notebook full of writings. Jennifer opened the notebook. The pages were filled with reflections on longing, the sacrifice of being away from family, and hopes for a future reunion. One entry caught her attention. I got work at Jack's farm. The pay isn't much, but I send all I can to them. I use different names with each transfer to avoid leaving traces. My little Nance must think guardian angels are helping. If only she knew it was her Bill watching over from afar. Mom, look at this, said Jennifer, showing her the note. Nancy read in silence, tears welling up again. Decades of resentment began to dissolve before the proof of William's enduring love. He worked at Jack's farm, said Mr. Oscar, about 3 miles from here. Jack's still alive, lives on the same property. Jack's farm was modest, with pastures for dairy cattle and a simple brick house. The farmer, now 82, was sitting on the porch when they arrived. Bill, of course I remember Bill, said Jack, adjusting his hat. Hardest worker I've ever seen. Showed up before sunrise and didn't stop till dark. But he always carried a deep sadness. Did he ever say why he was away from his family? Asked Jennifer. At first, nothing. Over time, he said he had to stay away to protect the people he loved, that he'd gotten mixed up in something bigger than himself, something dangerous. Jack stood and invited them inside. Come, I want to show you something. In the simple living room, Jack opened an old cabinet and took out a small wooden box. Bill gave me this before he left, said if a woman and a young lady ever came looking for him, I should give it to them. Inside the box was a wedding ring and a letter. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. Nancy recognized the ring immediately. It was the one she'd given William on their wedding day. A simple gold band she'd picked out at a modest jewelry store in downtown Portland. "He wore it till the very end," said Jack. "Never took it off. Always said he'd return it one day in person to the woman who owned his heart." This time the letter was addressed to Nancy. "My dearest wife, if you're reading this, it means our daughter followed the clues I left. I want you to know that every day away from you was a sacrifice, but it was the only way to protect you from what I uncovered in my work. My love for you never faded. You were, and always will be, the only one who holds my heart." Nancy pressed the ring to her chest and wept, as she hadn't in decades. Jennifer held her mother, feeling they were finally uncovering the truth about the man they'd misjudged for so long. "Jack, did my father say where he was going when he left here?" asked Jennifer. "He said he'd bought a small place near Cedar Springs, wanted to plant some trees, make a garden, said it was the dream you two had when you were young." Jennifer vaguely remembered her parents talking about owning a countryside home with fruit trees and a vegetable patch. It was the retirement dream William had always mentioned. "Do you remember the name of the property?" asked Nancy. "Three Sisters Farm, if I'm not mistaken. It's on the road to Pleasant Hill." The next day, Jennifer rented a car and took Nancy to Cedar Springs. The road was peaceful, passing through rural landscapes and small properties. When they arrived at the farm, they found a blue-painted wooden gate with a faded sign, "Three Sisters Farm." The property was visibly abandoned, but traces of care were still evident. There were fruit trees planted in neat rows, a vegetable garden that still showed signs of having been well tended, and a small but sturdy house. "Mom, look here," said Jennifer, pointing to 3 trumpet trees planted in a triangle at the center of the land. Nancy approached and saw small wooden plaques buried at the base of each tree. The first read Nancy, the second Jennifer, and the third Hope. "3 sisters," Nancy murmured. "He included us in the name of the property." As they explored the farm, an elderly woman appeared from the neighboring property. It was Mrs. Celia, a woman with graying hair and a gentle smile. "Are you related to Bill?" she asked. "Yes, I'm his wife, and this is our daughter," Nancy replied. "Good heavens, he talked about you so often. He always said one day you'd reunite here at this farm." Mrs. Celia invited them to sit in the shade of a mango tree. "Bill lived here for about 8 years. He worked hard, tended the land with great care, but he was always sick, coughing a lot. Still, he never complained." Jennifer felt a tightness in her chest. "Sick? What kind of illness?" "Lung problems, poor man. He said it had to do with work he'd done years ago, breathing in harmful things, but he didn't like to talk about it." Nancy held Jennifer's hand. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. William had truly been ill and had chosen to face it alone. "Did he mention leaving anything behind for his family?" Jennifer asked. "Oh yes. He always said he'd kept letters and mementos in a special place. Talked about a key the family would find when the time was right." Jennifer showed the golden key they'd found in the briefcase. "Is this the key?" "It might be. He always went to the bank in town every week, said he was taking care of important things for the family." At the Cedar Springs Bank, the manager confirmed that William Thompson had rented a safe deposit box many years earlier. When Jennifer presented the key and documents proving their relation, they were allowed to open it. The box contained no money, but was filled with letters, photographs, and keepsakes. There were hundreds of letters written over the years, one for each of Jennifer's birthdays, every Mother's Day, every special occasion. One letter in particular stood out. It was more recent, dated just 2 years prior. "My dear family, I feel my time is running short. The illness I've carried for years is worsening, but I want you to know that I was happy every day I lived thinking of you. At the farm, I planted trees with your names. I tended the land as I wish I could have tended to you. I hope one day you can forgive the choices I made. The love I feel for you is greater than any distance or time." Among the photographs, Nancy found images of Jennifer at different stages of life, pictures taken from afar, likely when William had watched her unseen, high school graduation, her wedding, the birth of her children.
"He was with us all along," Jennifer said, her voice trembling. "How did he get these photos?" Nancy asked. The answer came from an older letter, where William explained he'd asked acquaintances in Portland to take distant photos during important events.
He wanted to follow his family's life, even if he couldn't be part of it directly. At the bottom of the safe, they found a detailed map of the farm, with markings showing where a time capsule had been buried. The instructions were clear, beneath the largest tree 2 meters from the base. Back at Three Sisters Farm, Jennifer and Nancy found the tree marked on the map. It was a towering jequitiba that must have been planted soon after William bought the property. Mrs. Celia lent them a shovel, and after digging for a few minutes they uncovered a metal box buried exactly where the map indicated. Inside the box was a diary from William's final years. The pages recounted the simple routine of a man who had found peace in solitude, but never forgot where he came from. Today marks 25 years since I left. Jennifer must be 37 now. Did she marry? Do I have grandchildren? I plant flowers, hoping that one day she might bring her children here to play. Today would have been Nancy's 70th birthday. I remember the first birthday cake we made together. She was so happy. I hope she found happiness after I left. I hope she didn't suffer too much. The cough is getting worse. Dr. Andrew says it's only a matter of time. But I'm at peace. I've lived all these years knowing I made the right choice. They are safe. The last entry was from just a few months earlier. I've prepared everything so they can find me when the time comes. The clues are planted, the letters are stored. I want them to know that every day away from them was a day of love. Love that chose protection over presence. I hope they understand. Nancy closed the diary and looked around the farm. William had created a sanctuary of love and longing, a place where he had spent his final years constantly thinking of the family he had left behind. "Jennifer, where is he buried?" Nancy asked. "We need to find out, Mom." Mrs. Celia knew the answer. William had been buried in the Cedar Springs Cemetery, but under a false name. He had asked her to handle the arrangements, using documents he had forged years earlier. He said that if you ever came, I should tell you everything. The name on the tombstone is John Smith, but it's your bill resting there. At the Cedar Springs Cemetery, they found a simple tombstone with just one phrase: "Here rests one who loved in silence." There was no name, no dates, only the testament of a life dedicated to quiet love. Jennifer knelt before the tombstone and for the first time in 30 years wept for her father, not in anger or abandonment, but in longing and admiration. "Dad, I'm so sorry for hating you all these years," she whispered. Nancy knelt beside her daughter. "Bill, my love, forgive my lack of faith. Forgive me for believing you abandoned us." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That same afternoon, Jennifer decided she needed to share the discovery with Charles, her stepfather. For decades, he had insisted that William had been a weak and irresponsible man. It was time to correct that story. Charles was in the living room of the house he had shared with Nancy before she moved to Sunshine Retirement Home. He was a 68-year-old man with graying hair and a habit of speaking sternly. "Jennifer, you need to let go of this obsession with your father," he said as soon as she began sharing what they had found. "The man abandoned you, and that's that." "No, Charles, he didn't abandon us. Look at these documents." Jennifer showed him the letters, the photos, the bank records proving the money transfers. Charles reluctantly took the papers and read in silence. His expression gradually shifted from skepticism to surprise, then to something resembling embarrassment. This changes things," he murmured. "It changes everything, Charles. My mother spent 30 years believing she was abandoned by a man who actually sacrificed himself to protect her." Charles stood up and began pacing the room, clearly troubled. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I knew." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "What do you mean, you knew?" "Years ago, about 5 years after I married your mother, a letter arrived. It was from your father. He explained everything, asked me to take good care of you, said the truth would come out one day. Jennifer felt anger rising in her throat. And you never told her. You let my mother live all these years believing she was abandoned. I was afraid of losing her. If she knew he hadn't run off with someone else, that he still loved her. You're a coward, Charles, a selfish coward who preferred to watch my mother suffer just to keep your own comfort. Charles tried to defend himself, but Jennifer didn't want to hear it. She stormed out, slamming the door, and went straight to the Sunshine Retirement Home to tell Nancy what she'd discovered. Mum, there's something you need to know about Charles. When Nancy learned that her second husband had intercepted letters from William and kept the truth hidden for decades, her reaction was eerily calm. Call Charles here, now. Charles arrived at the retirement home with his head down, knowing he'd been found out. Nancy received him in the visiting room, with Jennifer by her side. Charles, in 30 years of marriage, how many times did you tell me William was a weak man? Nancy asked. Nancy, I can explain. How many times? She repeated, her voice firm. Many. I know I was wrong. You were wrong? Charles, you destroyed the memory of a man who sacrificed himself for this family. You made me live decades hating someone who loved me until his last day. Nancy struggled but stood up from her wheelchair with determination. Our marriage is over today. I don't want to see you again. Nancy, please, we can talk. There's nothing to talk about. You had 30 years to tell me the truth, and you chose to lie. Get out. Charles left the retirement home defeated. Nancy had made the hardest decision of her life, but also the most liberating. In the weeks that followed, Jennifer arranged to give William the recognition he deserved. She decided to change the name on the headstone and organize a ceremony so everyone who had known him in his final years could say a proper goodbye. The news spread through the small town of Cedar Springs. When the day of the ceremony came, Jennifer was surprised by how many people showed up. Mrs. Celia brought 3 neighbors whom William had helped through financial hardships. Mr. Jack came with 2 former employees who had worked with him on the farm. The bank manager brought records showing the regular donations William made to local charities, but the biggest surprise came when a woman in her 40s approached Jennifer. Excuse me for interrupting, but my name is Lauren. My father is Dr. Andrew, who cared for your William in his final years. Did your father ever speak of him? Often. Dad always said he'd never met anyone so courageous. William was very ill, but he refused expensive treatments because he wanted to use the money to help others. Lauren handed Jennifer an envelope. My father asked me to give this to you if the family ever came forward. Inside the envelope was a medical prescription and a letter from Dr. Andrew. William Thompson was one of the most honorable men I've known in 40 years of medicine. When I diagnosed him with lung disease, I offered treatments that could prolong his life. He refused, saying he wanted to die in peace without being a burden to anyone. He used every resource he had to help those in need in the community. He was a man of honor until the end. During the ceremony, person after person shared stories about William's generosity. Children he had taught to read, families he had helped through tough times, elderly folks he delivered groceries to. Jennifer realized her father had turned exile into a life mission. Far from his family, he had devoted himself to caring for other families. The pain of separation had become fuel for compassion. Mum, Dad didn't just love us. He loved everyone who crossed his path. He was always like that, said Nancy, wiping her eyes. Even when we were young, he was always helping someone. Now I see that never changed, even when he was away from us. After the ceremony, Jennifer and Nancy decided to restore Three Sisters Farm. The idea was to turn it into a shelter for women in difficult situations, a way to honor William's memory by continuing his work of helping others. While renovating the farmhouse, they made a discovery that moved them even more. When they peeled back the wallpaper from one of the walls, they found drawings and love messages written directly on the wood. Nancy, you are the light of my life, even in the darkness of distance. Jennifer, my dear daughter, may you find all the happiness I couldn't give you. One day we'll be together again, whether in this life or the next. The entire wall was a mosaic of love declarations, created over the years as William's way of feeling close to his family. "He was always talking to us," said Jennifer, running her fingers over the words carved into the wood. "We were never truly apart," Nancy added. 6 months later, Three Sisters Farm officially opened as a shelter. The first person welcomed was a young mother who had left an abusive relationship and needed a safe place to rebuild her life with her children. Jennifer, who had recently retired, dedicated herself fully to the project. Nancy, despite her age, insisted on helping however she could, sharing stories and offering advice to the women who came to the farm. "You know, Jennifer, I think your father planned all this," Nancy said one sunny afternoon sitting under the shade of the oak tree where they had found the journal. "What do you mean, Mom?" "He knew we'd uncover the truth one day. He knew it would bring us back together, and he knew we'd find a way to carry on his work." Jennifer looked around the farm. Children played in the garden while their mothers attended job training workshops. The place was alive with hope. "Maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe Dad always knew we'd end up here." A year after finding the suitcase, Jennifer received a call that left her deeply moved. It was from a journalist in New York City who had heard the story and wanted to feature it in a report. "Mrs. Anderson, your story has touched so many people. We've received dozens of letters from viewers who went through similar situations, families reunited after years of separation due to misunderstandings." The report aired on a popular program, bringing even more attention to the work at Three Sisters Farm. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing the project to expand. But the publicity also brought an unexpected surprise. 2 days after the report, Jennifer got a call from a man who introduced himself as Robert Freeman, a retired employee from the same agency where William had worked. "Mrs. Anderson, I saw the report about your father. I need to speak with you in person. I have important information about the case he uncovered." Robert was 75 years old and had worked in the translation department alongside William. When they met at a diner in Portland, he shared details that completed the puzzle. "Your father uncovered a scheme diverting funds meant for affordable housing projects. Politicians and business owners were stealing money that should have built homes for families in need. Why didn't you report it?" "We tried, but the people involved had too much power. Some of our colleagues who insisted on reporting it started receiving serious threats. One had his car sabotaged, another got kidnapping threats against his daughter." Robert explained that William had been the most persistent about pushing the case forward, until the threats turned directly toward his family. "The day he disappeared, a photo arrived of your mother and Jennifer entering the school. That's when he realized it wasn't a bluff." "What happened to the scheme?" "It continued for a few more years until an independent investigation finally managed to dismantle it. But that only happened because your father had kept copies of all the translated documents. Years later, those copies reached the right hands." Jennifer felt a mix of pride and sadness. Her father had paid a steep price, but his courage had helped bring justice even if he hadn't lived to see it. "Robert, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I think you deserve to know that William didn't die in vain. His sacrifice saved other families from losing their homes. This revelation gave even more meaning to the work Jennifer and Nancy were doing at the farm. William had fought for justice and people's right to decent housing. Now the farm continued that mission by offering temporary shelter to those in need. On a hot January afternoon, exactly 2 years after discovering the briefcase, Jennifer was watering the garden when she saw a young woman approaching with a baby in her arms. "Sorry to bother you, but I was told you help women in difficult situations." "Of course, come in. What's your name?" "Bethany. And this is my daughter, Hope." Jennifer stopped watering and looked at the woman, Bethany and Hope, the same names William had chosen for the trees on the farm. "Those are beautiful names. Come, let's talk." As she spoke with Bethany about her situation and how the farm could help, Jennifer couldn't shake the coincidence of the names, or maybe it wasn't a coincidence. "You know, Bethany, these names have a special meaning here at the farm." "How so?" "My father, who created this place, planted trees with our family's names. One of them is named Hope." Bethany smiled shyly. "My grandmother always said names carry destinies. Maybe I ended up here for a reason." That night, Jennifer told Nancy about Bethany and Hope's arrival. "Mom, sometimes I feel like Dad is still watching over everything here." "I feel it too, dear. It's like every person who comes to us was sent by him. Nancy had moved to the farm permanently after leaving the retirement home. At 77, she'd found a new purpose in life, helping other women rebuild their stories. "Jennifer, I want to tell you something," Nancy said one morning as they had coffee on the porch. "What is it, Mom?" "I've never felt as useful as I do now. All these years after William left, I felt lost, without purpose. Now I understand it all had meaning." "How so?" "If he hadn't left, if we hadn't gone through all that suffering, we never would have ended up here. We never would have created this place that's helping so many people." Jennifer reflected on her mother's words. Truly, the pain had transformed into purpose. The seeming abandonment had revealed itself as the greatest act of love, and the rediscovery of the truth had created a legacy that extended far beyond family. "Mom, I think Dad knew this would happen." "How could he have known?" "Remember the letter he left about planting seeds? I think he wasn't just talking about trees. He was talking about planting seeds of love that would one day blossom into something greater." 3 years after the discovery of the suitcase, Three Sisters Farm had become a beacon in the region. Over 200 women had passed through the shelter program, and many of them had managed to rebuild their lives completely. Jennifer, now 55, had become a recognized activist in the fight for women's rights. Nancy, despite her advanced age, remained active in the project, cherished by all the women as a loving grandmother. One autumn afternoon, as Jennifer walked through the farm, admiring the trees William had planted, now tall and lush, she was deeply moved by a surprise. Her daughter Melissa, who lived in New York City, arrived unexpectedly with special news. "Mom, I want you to be the first to know. I'm pregnant." Jennifer hugged her daughter with tears in her eyes. "Is it a boy or a girl?" "We don't know yet, but if it's a boy, we want to name him William. And if it's a girl, Hope." In that moment, Jennifer understood the circle was closing in the most beautiful way possible. Her father would be honored in the new generation, and the name Hope, which he had given to one of the farm's trees, would live on in the family. "Melissa, your grandfather would be so happy." "Mom, I'm sure he is. Look around. Look at what you've built here in his name." Jennifer looked around and saw children playing in the garden, women chatting animatedly on the porch, Nancy telling stories to a group of young mothers. The farm was vibrant with life and purpose. "You know, Melissa, now I understand what your grandfather meant when he wrote that true love transcends absence." "How so?" "He was physically absent for 30 years, but his love was always present, and now that love has multiplied in every life we've touched here." That night, Jennifer sat beneath the Jequitiba tree where they had found William's diary. It was her ritual whenever she needed to reflect on life. "Dad, if you can hear me, I want you to know we understand. We understand your sacrifice, we understand your choices, and most importantly, we're continuing your work." The wind gently rustled the leaves like a silent reply. "I promise we'll honor your legacy. I promise Three Sisters Farm will keep existing to help people who need a second chance in life." 6 months later, Melissa gave birth to a girl. As promised, she was named Hope. When Jennifer held her granddaughter for the first time, she felt she had finally fully understood the message her father had left behind. True love doesn't need physical presence to exist. It reveals itself through actions, sacrifices, and most of all, through the ability to inspire others to spread that love in the world. "Welcome, Hope," Jennifer whispered to the baby. "You carry the name your great-grandfather chose to represent everything he believed about the future." Nancy, now a great-grandmother, held the child with the same tenderness she had once held Jennifer decades before. "William, my love, our family is whole again," she said, gazing at the sky through the hospital window. A year later, Three Sisters Farm received recognition from the state government as a model social assistance project. During the ceremony, Jennifer was invited to give a speech. This project was born from a pain that lasted 30 years. It came from the realization that sometimes the people we love most make decisions we don't understand in the moment, but that makes sense when we see the bigger picture. She looked at the audience, which included officials, staff from the farm, and many women who had been helped by the project. My father, William Thompson, taught me that true love isn't what keeps us close, but what protects us, even if it means leaving. And he taught that sacrifices made out of love are never in vain, because they plant seeds that bloom in moments we can't foresee. After the speech, a young journalist approached Jennifer. "Mrs. Anderson, your story has inspired many people across the country. Are there plans to expand the project? The project has already grown beyond our dreams. Everyone who's passed through here has carried a piece of Three Sisters Farm's essence with them. They're spreading seeds of hope in their own communities." "And what's the biggest lesson you've learned from this experience?" Jennifer looked around, seeing Nancy playing with little hope under the trees William had planted. "The biggest lesson is that no love story truly ends. It transforms, multiplies, reinvents itself. My father wasn't physically present for 30 years, but his love was there in every decision we made, every person we helped, every seed of hope we planted." That evening, as the whole family gathered at the farm to celebrate the tribute, Jennifer picked up William's diary and reread the last entry he'd written. "I've prepared everything so they'll find me when the time comes. The clues are planted, the letters are kept safe. I want them to know that every day away from them was a day of love, love that chose protection over presence. I hope they understand." "We understand, Dad," Jennifer whispered, "and we'll make sure your love keeps blooming for generations to come." The night wind rustled the leaves of the Jequitibah tree again, and Jennifer smiled. She was sure somehow that William was there with them, watching his family reunited and his legacy of love spreading across the world. End of story. And you, what did you think of this story of love, sacrifice, and reunion? Could you imagine Jennifer's emotion upon discovering her father hadn't abandoned her, but had sacrificed himself out of love? Tell us in the comments which part touched you most, and if you've ever experienced something similar in your own family. Leave a like if this story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming tales. Thank you so much for joining us.